Hi guys, welcome to the latest video. I've just moved into a new house and probably going to be doing a few little videos and stuff on things I'm going to make for the house. But first project we need to get sorted is the office. And we need some shelving. It's like a box room office with like a small cupboard above the stairs like this. So I'll probably end up making a double door cupboard for there eventually and putting some shelves in there and stuff. But in this video I'm going to be making these shelves here. We've come up with a sort of floating design with a bit of a snazzy ends to it to finish them off so they don't just look like square blocks on the wall. What I'm going to be doing is fixing a batten along the wall, horizontally across inside the shelf. So these are going to be 58mm thick shelves. So we're going to have a batten run along this wall and this wall that the shelf will physically slot over, and the same along here, and a short one across here, so that the weight of the shelf is supported from this batten that's hidden within it. I don't think I'm going to bother putting anything up on these end sections, but we'll see when the time comes, see how strong it is. Might do something over here just on these sections because it's quite a long length to be supported from this batten, but like I say, we'll see how strong it ends up being. So this is what we want to achieve. It's going to be painted white, and yeah, just as smooth and clean as we can get it. I've made these 300 wide, A, to hold a file, like a paper file. They're about 280mm wide, and B, you'll get the most out of a sheet if they're under 300 wide, and you're obviously going to get 4 rips out of an 8x4 sheet as opposed to 3. So I've broken it down. This is how I'm going to make it. So these are the individual shelves. We've got 2 of these and 2 of these. So to break it down, what I'm going to do is get 4 battens of timber out, the thickness of the shelf minus the 2 outer coverings. 3 of them I'm going to use in the shelf, and then the 4th one will be used to fix to the wall, and the shelf will actually physically slot over that and then be fixed top and bottom and glued so that it fixes it to the wall. So you can see on this piece I've actually drawn it out, so you'll see where the battens will go. So all I'm going to do is use some 9mm MDF and get them out in a length. So that's 2.3, so I'm just going to use a full length of a sheet, cut it down in strips to 300mm wide, and then glue the battens on, glue and pin, and turn it over the same on the other side. I'll create a sandwich board of that length, then do all the mitre cuts and everything within it. Before I cut it down, I'm going to rip it to length on the saw so we've got nice square edges, and also cut that down so it's 9mm less than the 300 we want. So that's 300 finish, so it obviously wants to be 291, and then we'll have a capping piece on the front here that will be mitered round, so that will be mitered round in this fashion. So that will be a 10mm strip or 9mm strip like that, that will be mitered round there and there, and that will just hide any of the edges of the MDF. So effectively you'll see just that line there, which we will glue on and then sand and fill and paint. And so that should be what a finished product looks like. And the same principle for these ones. So these ones are a lot smaller. They're going to be from an 800mm board. So we'll do the same principle, we'll just make it up as a long board and then cut these miters, and to put some strength in these, what we'll do is put some dominoes within these joints here. So we'll domino them together through every joint on the 3 battens to give it some strength, and the same on these joints as well, so a domino within the joint and glue it back together. So that's the plan, let's get started. Okay, so we're in the workshop the day after I've designed the shelving. I've had a bit of a change of heart as to how I'm going to make the shelves. I thought I'd leave the start to the video on there. It sort of shows a bit that you can go away and think about things differently and how you're going to make them, and there's more than one ways to kill a cat. So instead of making the boards up as one piece like I showed you, what I'm going to do is actually just use the battens individually, not miter them, cut them off square, and then create the upstand of the shelves with another batten and domino them together, domino and screw or whatever them together, and just make them up as individual L pieces. Then I'll clad them with the MDF like this, so they will be a cross section of the MDF. So that's all 9mm, excuse the drawing. And then on the one that returns around the corner, obviously this will be a square piece, like so. I will then miter the piece as a oneer and then bring it around the corner so it returns and we get rid of this bit. So that's how I'm going to make it. The reason I've changed my mind is it's a bit of a strength reason, but also it's a bit easier to miter that as a straight cut on my saw, because it will actually cut it all in one pass, whereas to do that whole piece as a miter at 60mm thick, my miter saw is basically not big enough to do that cut in one piece, and it just means finishing it by hand. And also, if that was mitered there and this board met on the corner, if there's any movement you get a crack down that corner, and it's not something I like to see. It's quite difficult to fill or put filler in on that cut edge if it's on a radius there. So I'd rather have that board which you see coming down flat and having the join between the 2 boards underneath. It's also probably slightly stronger in that you can domino and screw this properly within, and then this board here is overlapping the joint, so if you put some pins and glue that through there, you're adding strength through that joint with this solid piece, whereas if you just 45-degree miter the entire thing, all the strength is just basically in them 3 dominoes and the glue within the joint. So hopefully it'll be a bit stronger, simpler to make, and I can miter it a lot easier. So this is the timber I'm going to use. It's classed as 38 by 50 PAR. It's actually finished around 45mm thick by about 36mm, something like that. I've chosen this because it's been planed up for a while and sat in the timbers merchant, so hopefully it's acclimatised a bit better than a bigger piece of timber that you would then rip down and plane to size. As it's 45mm thick, I can still run it through the surfacer to take any imperfections out of the straightness, so I can straighten the boards up still with that 5mm of timber left and finish them 40mm to get a nice straight batten. And it's just nice and quick, there's no prep really, I just cut it to length and straighten it. So I'm going to rough them to length, straighten all the pieces, then cut them off to the perfect length, and then join them together with the domino. Okay, so I've run all the battens through the planer now. So what I'm going to do is cut the battens to length for these short pieces, and then for the longer sections I'm going to just leave them a bit longer than they need to be, and just make a nice square cut there for that joint. So I can cut them ones off at the height of this piece minus the 2 thicknesses of the MDF. So it's a 9mm MDF, so we want to take that height, which is 160, and then knock off the 18mm. So we want to be 142. I can cut that one to length, and then these sections here, we've got the measurements above. So 1m80 overall from there to the wall. So if I cut it off to that length, that would give me plenty of overhang because of this section here. So there's actually 40mm of timber and 9mm of MDF extra there, because that piece of timber will be butt jointed away from the edge. So if I keep to them measurements for that and then cut them ones off exactly 142, I can then join all them bits together. Okay, so I've got all the uprights cut off there, 24 of. There's 6 of these smaller sections, so this is the smaller shelf. It's going to look like this. So joint there, joint there. I'm going to make 3 of them up. Then they're going to be spaced across the piece of MDF and just pin it to it and glue it to it. So for the little ones, there's a joint in each end of these. They cut to length, and the bigger ones, just one end, there's going to be a joint, and then the other end is left long for me to do that mitre cut of the entire shelf. Remember when we're cutting these smaller pieces, because we'll be doing the shelves, one shelf is right-handed, one shelf is left-handed. If you want to keep to a face mark, obviously you want to do them in pairs, but it doesn't matter too much because you can flip them over if you wish to and just have the face mark on these to the back. But as with all joinery, you probably want to keep everything in pairs, because when it can't be flipped over, you might come a cropper thinking that it can, so it's best to keep them handed. Always put plenty of PU glue on the end grain of timber, because it seems to soak up quite well, and you want plenty left for it to actually dry and set in the joint, not all get soaked up into the grain. For the 2 centre battens within the shelf, I've decided to only do one end of the joint as a 90-degree angle and leave the other end short. The reason for that is you've got the Z shape there, like so. If this was the wall side, what I'm going to do is have a batten on the wall that the shelf slots over. So when that's in the middle of the shelf, that batten is obviously going to have to be cut short, so that this batten can run through on the wall and give it some strength. So obviously the centre support for both shelves only wants one end of the 90-degree joint. Same principle with the bigger ones, you're just doing one end and leaving it long so they can be mitered afterwards. So while I wait for them internal battens to dry, so I can glue the other half of them up, I'm going to rip the boards down to size that are going to clad them. So I'm going to use 9mm moisture resistant MDF. With my original design, I was going to rip them down wider and then trim them once they were as a complete unit, so they've got a nice square edge. But obviously making them this way so that the Z shapes already and not just a flat piece, I can't rip them down afterwards to create the finished width. So the boards are going to have to be ripped to finished width, ready for gluing. So I want a 300mm shelf, so I'm going to rip them down at 291, which is 9mm less than the finished width of the shelf. That 9mm less being the thickness of the MDF that will be on the face of the shelf to cover the batten and the edges of the MDF. Just shorten that middle piece, that'll be the middle one. Just shorten that a bit more so that when the batten is on the wall, as an example, I'll use this as a batten, so that will be screwed to the wall and the shelf will slot over it, so they will sit there. I'm just going to give it a bit of clearance so that if it was tight, I didn't want it to, if I have to just run the shelves into the wall with a bit of a scribe, I didn't want that to be tight and then it not clear, so I've just shortened that a little bit to allow for that. Okay, so they're the three pieces of our first shelf. So all I'm going to do is layer them with glue. Make sure all the glue's off the faces where the boards are sitting. So when I'm gluing these battens in, I want the front to be flush with the front of the shelf board, and I want to keep the back batten, the depth of the batten going on the wall, away from there. So as we put that in, we use the batten I'm going to be using on the wall as a spacer. And if I just bring it, I think if I stick a line on there that's 5mm deeper than the thickness of the batten that I'll be using, then that'll be a good guide. So, thickness of the batten. So I can just use the thickness of that timber. Okay, so that's one of the shelves glued up. Obviously have a capping piece to go around this front edge, and that's a right hand small shelf glued. So the cavity in the back here, there'll be a batten on the wall, screwed to the wall, but this will slot over and then be screwed to take the weight of the shelf. So that'll be on the back wall. Then on the side wall there'll be a short batten that will screw in here, and that will take the weight, the side load of the shelf. Okay, so we're back in the workshop this morning. Managed to get a coat of paint on everything last night so that it could dry ready for this morning. I've just denibbed the paint that went off overnight. I've managed to get one coat on the taller shelves, and the small shelves have had 2 coats of paint. So the plan from now is to cut the square join on the bigger shelves so they can slot together, stick a domino in them, and then cut some battens for the walls and take them onto site and get them fitted to the walls. Make sure everything's fine and then bring them back and I'll spray them. Okay, so that's the shelf glued up with the 45-degree mitre. I don't know if you saw, stuck some of the timber that was within the shelves, same thickness, just glued them across the joint as well to give it a bit extra strength. So we've basically left with the assembled shelf. Now we'll go and fit a batten to the wall, level around the walls. I've already cut them off to the lengths minus about 10mm. To give us a bit of wiggle room if we have to scribe them in to the walls. So yeah, the battens will just sit in that groove in the back of the shelf and be sort of glued and pinned top and bottom to that solid batten, and that should support the weight of the shelf. Okay, so I've set the laser up to the top of the batten, so that will be where I'm screwing the batten round to the top of it. And the outside walls are fine because they're a block wall. You can put holes in the battens wherever you want. But these walls are stud walls, so to find the studs, I use a few rare earth magnets stacked on top of each other and just run them over the wall and eventually you'll find a screw where they're going to hit a stud. So wherever there's a screw, there's going to be a stud underneath. So if you do there, mark it, find the next one, mark it, you get a good idea of where your studs are going to be. So now that we've got that position, once I fix that batten on, I can mark this one, I know where the studs are going to be, I can get a decent fixing into that stud. Okay, so now I've got the shelves on the battens and they're level on the actual top surface of the shelf. What I've done is measured from the corners of the walls, put 2 marks on the ceiling, one there just to the right, one over here, then set up my laser lever to pick up them points on the ceiling so it casts a flat line parallel with the wall, where I want the front of them shelves to be. So I've set that about 10mm away from the shelf. Then I've used a block like this. You just put it onto the shelf. I'll try and show you if you can pick it up. So you put the block like that on the shelf and the laser casts a line onto the block. You tick that line, and then when you get all the shelves so that the tick line, when you put it on the shelf, is on the laser line, you know they're all parallel and level. Once you've done that, I set up a scribing tool. So the point of reference for me on this job is the window. So when they're all pushed back, this point up here is the widest point, so I've got to scribe these shelves back so that it's the same gap there as over there. So it's about 8mm. So I've set my scriber to just a little over 8mm. Then you just run that round the wall and put a pencil line on there, and then we'll scribe that back with a plane, and then them shelves should sit back nicely against the wall snugly and have the same gap down the sides of the window. You can also, while it's set up, do the same thing for the back of the shelves. So when you're setting these shelves to this block to the tick line, wherever it is, there, you're obviously going to be pulling the shelves off the wall in places to meet that line. So whichever the widest gap is that you've got on any of the shelves, that's what you set your scriber to, and then you trim that amount off all of the other shelves. You just run it round against the wall, and it'll show a pencil line against of that gap that you need to take off from the timber. So if it's tight somewhere else and 10mm at other places, you need to take 10mm off where it's tight. But just using the laser to set that line up gives you a really good flat reference face, because if you start using a hand spirit level and trying to move things about and get them level, you try and level this shelf here and touch it a bit to level it up, it moves over there. So having the laser there to reference all the time is a brilliant bit of kit. Fast forward a few days and we're at this point now. I managed to get the shelves sprayed and fitted, but I didn't really get a chance to film it because I was under a bit of pressure with time constraints. So all I did was slot them in place for the fitting and then just popped a screw in from the top into each batten. I'm not even going to bother filling that because it'll be covered with files, etc. So you won't see it anyway. And doing it this way makes it removable, so if you ever needed to take the shelves down, perhaps to repaint them, it's going to be easier to paint them again off the wall than it would be if I glued them to the wall and had to hand paint them. Hope you've enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. If you did enjoy it, pop me a like, maybe a comment, and don't forget to subscribe.